This is how to deal with blight in your garden the natural way. That means without using harsh chemicals and things that are going to upset the delicate ecosystem of your garden. Now, blight famously affects tomatoes and potatoes, but it can affect any member of the nightshade family. And it can spread really rapidly in warm, moist conditions. It can be a devastating problem to get and can wipe out entire crops if not carefully managed. Once it does take hold, it can reduce the yield of the plants and it can compromise the storage ability of anything they produce. Blight tends to be particularly devastating in wet summers, which sometimes we do get in the UK, or in poorly ventilated greenhouses or polytunnels. Now, how do you know if you've got blight? There are two types of blight, early blight and late blight. Now, early blight will generally appear around midsummer in wet seasons. You generally see dark brown or black spots appearing on the older foliage. The spots will then often develop with concentric wings or a target-like pattern appearing. Leaves then yellow and dry out and drop off. Sadly, it can really affect the amount of fruit set that you get on a tomato plant and massively reduce the yield. Now, late blight is the much more aggressive form of blight, and it generally becomes a problem as we approach autumn at the end of the season, especially during wet seasons. Look out for large, dark, water-soaked looking patches appearing on the leaves. There may also be a white fuzzy mould on the underside of the leaves, particularly in very damp conditions. If blight gets onto the fruit, it will look like brown, sunken, solid looking patches. And potatoes that have been affected will show a reddish brown rot inside when you cut them open. Now, a lot of people think that once you get blight, it's over and done with and you need to pull out all your crops. But actually, there are a number of things that you can do to either prolong the season once it's set in or prevent blight from taking hold in the first place. First of all, it's a really good idea to always select a few blight-resistant varieties when selecting your potatoes and tomatoes. Make sure they're in the mix with your other conventional varieties. This way, if the season surprises you and it's very wet, you will always have something that's got a chance of thriving. Make sure when you're planting out that you give a decent spacing around each plant. This will help reduce humidity levels and produce a really good airflow around each plant. And make sure that you avoid overhead watering as well. Always water at the base of the plant. If possible, it's a good idea to plant your potatoes early so that you can harvest them before the blight season really starts. And always make sure that you really avoid planting different nightshade plants too close together. Aim to produce the strongest plants you can. Feed tomato plants regularly. The stronger and healthier the plant are, the longer they're going to be able to survive once they've got blight. If you have an undercover space, it's a really good idea for that to be where you grow your tomatoes. By growing undercover, you are vastly reducing the risk of getting blight in the first place. However, you will have to remember that if wet weather is forecast, you're going to want to keep the doors of greenhouses and polytunnels firmly closed to keep the spores out. Blight spreads in wet weather, so it is forecast, close those doors and windows. You do, however, want to make sure that the area is well ventilated. If the air in your greenhouses and polytunnels doesn't move around at all, it's the absolute perfect environment for molds like blight to really take hold. You can make your own antifungal sprays. You can make a milk spray with 1 part milk to 9 parts water. Now, when this is sprayed onto plants weekly, the proteins in the milk have an antiseptic effect, and this really damages the fungus, so it can help to slow the progression of blight. Another thing to consider is a chamomile tea spray. You just soak a chamomile tea bag in a spray bottle full of water and then spray it directly onto the plants. Chamomile has a natural antifungal effect, which again can stunt the progression of blight. If you do get blight, you do not need to immediately remove all your plants. You can keep the crops going and salvage as much of the yield as possible. For potatoes, immediately cut down and remove all the foliage, but leave the tubers in the ground to develop a little further before you harvest them. For tomatoes, as soon as you see any foliage that is affected by blight, you need to remove it. This will really slow the spread. You may end up with plants that have almost no foliage on, but as long as there's a stem and roots, the fruit will continue to develop. Make sure you check the plants regularly. Once blight set in, you need to be checking them every few days and removing any signs of blight that you see. If you do see the infection move to the fruit, you want to harvest that fruit as quickly as possible. Blight does not affect people, so you can use that, and it may be possible to cut out those affected areas and still make use of the tomatoes in sauce making and that kind of thing. So hopefully this video has given you confidence of how to approach blight in your garden. Happy growing, guys.